15 in 1989. And of course, when you are 15, you have lots of other things to do rather than to think about politics. But in Czechoslovakia at that point, and especially in Prague, and I was from Prague, you have felt the change, obviously, of the atmosphere. At the beginning of the year, there was something was called the Palachs Week. I mean, there were demonstrations of people, not just the famous dissidents or oppositionists, but people coming to the streets and sort of reminding about the death of Jan Palach 20 years ago. And it was crushed heavily by the police. So at that point, as a 15 years old, I was not taking part in Palach's Week, but I knew about it because many people were concerned in Prague. In summer, again, there was a sort of reminder of 1968 and the invasion of Soviet armies and other armies of the Warsaw Pact. Again, as a child from Prague, I sort of knew there is something happening, that there was a clash between the demonstrators and the police. So I felt that something is happening. And then in the autumn, we would meet all these East German cars and East Germans, crossing the Czechoslovakia and coming to Prague and staying actually there at the embassy. So this is again something that we, even as kids, got it. And then of course, when the 17th November, the demonstration happened, at that point I was with we had some kind of what in Polish you would call harcery. I mean this sort of scout movement, and we went with this group away from Prague. When we came back, there were these everywhere in Vinohrady, where I lived. There were these police cars, and it was obvious that the police was absolutely activated. So at that point, I remember that I understood as a 15 years old, now it is here. I mean, either there is going to be a civil war, or there is going to be a big change. And so I knew that something is happening. And then, as a high school student, actually I was in the first year of my studies, we were then in a way employed by the university students who were in Prague and Brno and Bratislava and other cities were already organizing the demonstrations and organizing the student unrest, and we were in a way hired by them as the helping force. So we were bringing some materials from one university to the other, or one faculty to the other. So we in a way took part in it, even though we were still in this kid or children's age. Memory, there is a general notion of 1989 as the decisive change of in Central Eastern Europe, not obviously the whole Eastern Europe, because for the eastern parts of Europe, 1991 actually is the more important year. But in a way, we have the notion that it started in 1989 in Poland, Eastern Germany, Hungary, Czechoslovakia. So in that sense, it's common topos or common point in the, let's say, historical conscious. As about common or shared memory, I'm not sure. I have the feeling that if there are shared memories, which are obviously partly personal, but also partly produced by or reproduced by, media, the way how it was covered in media, the way how we are commemorizing actually these events, then it's more or less shared within the, let's say, language or national communities. I would say that Czechs, in a way, and Slovaks have much of shared common memory about how 1989 was going on in Czechoslovakia. And, of course, they know that it's connected with the Polish events, with the Hungarian events, but there the images would be different. So in this sense, as far as a memory is concerned, I would say that it is not sort of united or shared very much, because it's difficult to share, because, we live in pictures, we live in languages, we live in words that are given to us by our mother tongue, and they are given to us by the environment in which we live. However, we understand very well, and this is also a part of the memory, that this was really something that does not or did not concern only our country, that it was something that was shaping the whole Europe, and just merely the fact that after these changes happened in 1990, I was at that point 16, and it was the first time when we could cross freely the borders, and we could go to France. Usually we did not have much money, so we traveled by hitchhiking, And we were welcomed everywhere in Europe because this was a year of still, there was a lot of euphoria. So this is already a memory, this kind of post-1990 memory of something that now Europe opened in front of our eyes, Europe opened in front of our lives, and we could really, for the first time see the places that we always wanted to see, like, Eiffel Tower in Paris. Deliver them the message what 1989 was without delivering them the sort of broader message of what the 20th century was. So in order for the younger generation to understand what was it about, we have to really connect it with 1930s, with the economic crisis. We have to connect it with the war and with the post-war, obviously. So this should be a story of 20th century within which creates the context of 1989. And I hear a lot of people complaining about the fact that the younger generation do not know much about history, etc. But I think it's not really very new thing. Younger generations rarely are very much interested in history, and younger generations have many other things to do apart from being interested in history and historical personalities. What we have to do is to provide them with material once they start to be interested, and it might be different, initiatives, different points in their life when the people start to be interested in history. They might start to be interested when they are 50, they might start to be interested when they are 24, but somehow I have the feeling that whoever starts to establish his or her life, starts to have kids, etc., then the people understand much better that what is the continuity of history, what is the continuity of generations, and then people actually get really interested in history. With the younger generations, of course, we have to arouse their emotions, we have to arouse their interest through interesting narratives, through interesting faiths, through telling them stories. And as I said, we cannot explain them only emotionally what happened in 1989 if we do not explain them actually in what context it's happening. And this is the context of what Eric Hobsbawm called the short 20th century indeed. The century that started with the war, First World War, and which witnessed another war, and which witnessed another war, Cold War, and the end of it we have seen 1989. There are more symbolic places. Of course, there is the Národní Street, where the first clash on 17th of November in 1989 between the demonstrators, mostly formed by students and, let's say, Prague intellectual milieu or artistic milieu, and the police happened, which in the Czech narrative is, or Czech and Czechoslovak narrative is considered to be the real start of the whole and very swift changes. There is obviously Wenceslas Square and the Letná place or plain, where then once the demonstration started and once actually the civic forum was sort of like using the popular discontent, the demonstrations as a pressure means against the government. There are hundreds of people gathered. So this kind of Letná plain, which is not that far from here, and the Wenceslas Square with the oppositionists and some people from the exile coming back and talking to the people. These are images with obviously Václav Havel as the most symbolic person, but many others too. Václav Malý, the famous dissident priest, Marta Kubišová, the singer who was singing there for the demonstrators. These are the symbolic, some of the symbolic places in Prague. Similarly, we would have similar symbolic places in Bratislava for this sort of Slovak imaginary with other people such as Milan Kňažko, Jan Budaj, František Mikloško, and many others. So these are the symbolic personalities and places. And of course, that would be also, however, the symbolicism, which in a way is European symbolicism, and this is the Berlin Wall. Once people, but this is not something that most of the Czech and Slovak population would see, in their own eyes, but just these images, and I think that we share it throughout Europe, the images of crushing the Berlin Wall and sort of crossing the border between Western Berlin and Eastern Berlin. This is something that captured the imaginary of not only Czechs, Slovaks, Germans, Poles, but also it was a global phenomenon. I I consider Václav Havel obviously to be one of the most important historical personalities in, let's say, Czech and Central European history, that is for sure. I consider him to be one of the best playwrights, for sure. I mean, his plays is something that will remain to be part of the literature forever, until it exists in this language, strange Czech language. And I also consider him to be a great, actually, political personality. Not that much political philosopher, even though he's considered like that by many, especially those who read his Power of the Powerless, maybe the most important dissident essay whatsoever that made a career throughout the global village of nowadays. He's a great and powerful symbol. He, however, as every great powerful symbol, is somebody with whom a growing Czech citizen or intellectual or somebody who is interested in the public affairs has to come to terms with. As the same with Masaryk, as is the same with, I would be whatever in Polish would be Pilsudski or Dmowski or Adam Michnik. I mean, these are personalities with whom, if you read them, if you listen what they did, if you read their life stories, not everything is absolutely, only positive. Yeah, you have to come to terms with their legacy. And right nowadays, I think this Havelian legacy in Czech politics and Czech political thought and Czech political culture is something that is still debated and will be debated for long. Because his conception of politics and anti-politics, his conception of what the new democracy after 1989 should be, how much it should connect to the experience of a descent and what is translatable and what's not translatable from these times, is, of course, many times contested. And I see especially the youngest generation of intellectuals and political activists who are, I would say, to some extent very anti-Havelian, because they are very critical, especially in judging not Havel's dissident life, but rather the post-dissident presidential life. And so I see that in the Czech political discussion, the discussion around Havel will be really long-lasting, and we are far before any kind of consensus on Havel as a historical personality, as a political thinker, and as a great symbolic figure in Charter 77 was definitely the most important change in the development of opposition in Czechoslovakia, exactly because it connected to changes that were happening in the international level. It connected to this, what we call now, Helsinki effect. That means to the new rise of human rights language as a language of international politics and also of diplomacy. Charter 77 was one of the oppositional groups in Eastern Europe that, in a way, captured this sort of change and connected to human rights, and therefore it became so important. So it's important from the point of view, immensely important from the point of view of, let's say, the embeddedness of Czechoslovak history in the broader history. But for the Czechoslovak history itself and for the Czechoslovak political culture later, it was also very important, exactly because it was the first oppositional group that was formed from very diverse political streams. So you already said, I mean, you have people who were former communists who were sacked of their jobs and whatever party membership, and after 1968 you have people like Havel, who was coming from this liberal, interwar liberal bourgeoisie and artistic circles. You had people who were underground, band players who did not have any kind of intellectual ambitions, who just wanted to play their music. You have Catholics, you have Protestants. All these people gathered in small numbers, that's for sure, but they gathered in Charter 77 and they tried to forge out some kind of common cause. And the common cause was, yes, defense of civic rights and defense of human rights. And in this way, Charter 77, it's considered like that by not only historians, but also especially by people who are witnesses and who went through this experience, was a prefiguration of democratic life, because you are meeting somebody who is your opponent intellectually or ideologically, but you have to talk to him or to her, and you have to, find some kind of consensus. So this was a great school of diversity, and at the same time consensus making. And in this sense, the Chartists and the people who then played a very important role, especially in the first years after 1989. They always stressed this fact that, okay, Chart 77 in this sense was a prefiguration of some kind of consensual democracy, because let us meet, let us talk. Of course, they had a great incentive for that, in the sense that they had big enemy, and it was the state socialist regime and the dictatorship, and they always could unite on the fact that yes, now we are oppressed by the regime, and we have to somehow find a way how to tackle this and how to help ourselves and how to self-organize the society, etc. So they had the very strong cause why to come together and why to try to find some kind of consensus. But in a way, it was very important for, I would say, for the Czech and Slovak political culture after 1989, even though you cannot say that there are clear traces of it in our politics, which of course sometimes is much less consensual and much more sort of like, harsh fight than we would like to.